The last of the autumn light was bleeding out of the sky by the time I pulled my dusty sedan up the winding, overgrown driveway. The house loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple of the horizon. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, with the kind of deep-set decay that spoke of generations of neglect, not just a few forgotten years. This was it then, the ancestral home, my unexpected inheritance. My name is Dean. I'm not one for sentimentality, never have been. Family history for me was a series of faded photographs and vague anecdotes, distant echoes of people I'd never known. This house, bequeathed to me by a great aunt I'd met precisely once at a funeral when I was 7, felt less like a legacy and more like a burden. Still, a burden I was determined to manage. My life had always been about methodical problem solving, and this was just a larger, dustier problem. The air out here was thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. A faint, sweetish odor I couldn't quite place, like old potpourri mixed with the metallic tang of rust. Weeds clawed at the stone foundations, and the porch sagged under the weight of accumulated time. As I stepped onto the creaking boards, a shiver traced its way up my spine. But it was the cold, I told myself, just the late autumn chill seeping into my bones. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, groaned open with surprising ease, revealing a cavernous entryway swallowed by gloom. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows, like tiny, frantic spirits. Every surface was veiled in a thick, velvety layer of grime. The silence inside was profound, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of my own breathing. Each room I entered was a tableau of forgotten lives. Furniture draped in white sheets like ghostly figures, peeling wallpaper depicting scenes of pastoral bliss now marred by water stains, and the pervasive scent of age. Old paper, stagnant air, and that peculiar Swedish note again, stronger now. I wasn't looking for ghosts. I was looking for a circuit breaker, a way to bring some semblance of light to this mausoleum. The dim yellow glow did little to dispel the gloom, only highlighting the decay in starker detail. I spent the rest of the afternoon methodically exploring, documenting, making a mental inventory. My detachment was a shield, a necessary barrier against the sheer weight of the past pressing in. I found a grand, albeit crumbling, dining room, a kitchen frozen in time with an ancient wood-burning stove, and upstairs, several bedrooms, each with its own specific brand of mustiness. It was in what must have been a study or a library that I found it. The room was lined with shelves overflowing with leather-bound books, their spines cracked and faded. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the center, buried under stacks of yellowed papers, inkwells, and a scattering of curiosities. As I began to clear a space, pushing aside a tarnished brass letter opener and a collection of dried, brittle flowers, my fingers brushed against something cool and smooth beneath a pile of old ledgers. I pulled it out carefully. It was a music box, unlike anything I'd ever seen. The entire surface was a riot of intricate carvings, swirling vines, tiny, delicate birds, and what looked like stylized human figures with elongated limbs, their faces serene yet strangely melancholic. There were no visible seams, no obvious keyhole or winding mechanism, just the smooth, continuous flow of the wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite, almost impossibly fine, as if carved by a miniature ancient hand. It felt old, impossibly old, radiating a quiet hum of history. As I turned it over, my thumb brushed a tiny, almost invisible catch on one side. With a soft click, a small, ornate key, no bigger than my little finger, sprang out from a hidden compartment. It was made of tarnished silver, delicate and twisted like a miniature withered branch. A strange sense of anticipation, a feeling I rarely indulged, stirred within me. This wasn't just another dusty relic. It felt significant. I wound the key slowly. A soft, almost imperceptible whirring sound came from within the box, a gentle awakening. Then a melody began to drift out, thin and ethereal, like the breath of a ghost. It was haunting, melancholic, a tune that felt both beautiful and profoundly sad, weaving a spell of quiet sorrow through the dusty air. It wasn't loud, but it filled the room, seeping into the corners, wrapping around me. The notes were like droplets of cold water, each one distinct, each one resonating with a deep, ancient ache. As the melody played, something else caught my eye, tucked beneath the music box's former resting place. It was a rolled-up parchment, brittle with age, tied with a faded ribbon. I unrolled it carefully. It wasn't a deed, not exactly, but a fragmented map, or perhaps a schematic, hand-drawn and annotated in a spidery script. Most of it was illegible, but one particular section, circled in red ink, stood out starkly. The detached curiosity I usually operated under began to fray at the edges. A prickle of unease, sharp and insistent, started to crawl up my neck. This house, this inheritance, was far more than just a dilapidated property. It was a repository of secrets, and something, stirred by the music box's haunting tune, felt like it was beginning to awaken. The prickle of unease that had snaked up my neck didn't dissipate. It tightened its grip, a cold, slender tendril coiling around my throat even after the music box's mournful tune faded into the pervasive quiet of the house. I stood there, rooted, the faint scent of dust and old wood suddenly sharper, more cloying, and I was an outsider, a city dweller, susceptible to the theatricality of inherited gloom. My hand, almost of its own accord, reached for the intricate lid of the music box. The brass felt cool beneath my fingers, the carved angels and demons surprisingly smooth despite their age. I hesitated, a flicker of something close to apprehension dancing in my periphery. But my determination, a stubborn streak I'd always possessed, pushed it aside. Curiosity, I decided, was a stronger force than a vague chill. I wound the small key again, feeling the subtle resistance, and lifted the lid. This time, I paid closer attention to the tune itself, trying to decipher its rhythm, its strange, almost familiar cadence. It wasn't menacing, not exactly. It was sorrowful, like a lullaby sung for something long lost. As the music played, I walked over to the heavy oak desk I'd been attempting to clear earlier. My grandfather's spectacles, which I'd carefully placed on a stack of ledgers, were gone. I frowned, scanning the cluttered surface. Had I moved them? I was certain I hadn't. I'd set them right there next to the inkwell. I checked the floor, under the desk, even in the half-open drawers. Nothing. A minor annoyance, easily dismissed. Probably just my own absent-mindedness, a side effect of being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of forgotten things in this place. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. The house was a labyrinth of distractions. The antique grandfather clock, a silent sentinel in the corner, seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible vibration. It was faint, indistinct, like the rustle of old paper or the sigh of wind through a loose pane. I froze, my eyes darting to the window, then to the closed door. The sound didn't repeat. It was a fleeting, inky smear against the wall, too quick to properly register, too substantial to be nothing. It moved like a ripple across still water, then vanished. I spun around, my breath catching. My gaze swept the room, searching for an explanation, a draft, a falling curtain, anything. The heavy drapes were drawn tight, the air still. My rational mind wrestled with the image, trying to fit it into a logical framework. Fatigue, I decided. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I'd been working too hard, poring over these old records, trying to make sense of a legacy I barely understood. The following morning, the music box called to me again. I wound the key, the small mechanism whirring softly, and let the sorrowful tune fill the cavernous drawing room. This time, as the melody unfurled, The sense of being watched intensified. It wasn't a casual glance, but a persistent, almost physical pressure on my back, a prickling sensation across my skin that felt like countless unseen eyes boring into me. I spun around abruptly, my fists clenching, ready to confront. What? The empty air? The antique furniture? The dusty portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose gazes always seemed to follow me? There was nothing. A wave of dizziness washed over me. A sudden disorienting lurch in my perception. The air grew heavy with the stench of mildew and something metallic. Something like old rust and fear. My ears registered a faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. I was no longer in the ancestral home. I was standing in a narrow, windowless hallway lit by a single flickering bare bulb overhead. The walls were scarred, institutional gray, and along one side, heavy steel doors with small barred windows were spaced at regular intervals. This wasn't a part of the house, not even a forgotten cellar. This was an old death row corridor marked for closure. The faint, melancholic notes of the music box still echoed, but they were distorted, tinny, as if coming from a great distance. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision fractured. The metallic tang in the air gave way to the scent of old dust. I gasped, stumbling back against a velvet-upholstered armchair, my hands pressing against my temples. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. What in God's name was that? My mind, ever the pragmatist, immediately began constructing explanations. Stress, exhaustion. The sheer isolation of this place was getting to me. My imagination, overstimulated by the eerie atmosphere and the unsettling music, had conjured a waking hallucination. That had to be it. I was sleep-deprived, likely dehydrated, and certainly overwhelmed. A logical mind couldn't entertain anything else. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. Then another. The music box continued its lament, oblivious to my internal turmoil. I stared at it, the intricately carved angels now seeming to leer, the demons to grin. I snapped the lid shut with a decisive click, cutting off the melody mid-note. The abrupt silence was almost as jarring as the music itself. No, I told myself, pushing down the lingering tremor in my hands. This was just an old house. It needed airing out, a good cleaning, and perhaps a dose of my own stubborn practicality. I wasn't going to let a few misplaced items, some creaks, and a vivid daydream chase me away. This was my inheritance, my family's history. I was determined to see it through, even if my imagination insisted on playing these unsettling tricks. Too quick to properly register, too subtle to dismiss. I blinked, hard, my eyes straining against the gloom. The single lamp on the mantelpiece cast long, dancing shadows, turning every crack in the plaster into a grotesque grin, every piece of furniture into a hunched observer. I told myself it was just the light playing tricks, a tired mind conjuring phantoms from dust and cobwebs. But the cold, an insistent, creeping chill that had nothing to do with the drafts, seemed to intensify in that exact spot. I waited, breath held, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling around me. Nothing. My hand instinctively went to the music box, still sitting on the side table, its polished wood feeling oddly warm under my fingertips. I hadn't played it since that first time, hadn't dared. The melody, for all its melancholic beauty, had burrowed deep into my mind, an insidious earworm that hummed just beneath the surface of my thoughts. A low thrum began then, not from the house itself, but from the music box. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration that made the air around it shimmer. My gaze fixed on it, mesmerized and terrified. It was the same melody, yet it wasn't. Each note felt elongated, stretched thin, as if played on rusted strings. There was a subtle discord, a flat quality that grated on my nerves, twisting the sorrow into something sharper, more predatory. This wasn't just a relic, It was an instrument, an active participant. As the music spiraled, the room around me seemed to waver. The edges of the old, cracked wallpaper blurred, the dust motes in the lamp's beams swirled into chaotic patterns. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, burst into my mind. I was a child again, maybe 7 or 8, lost in a dense, unfamiliar forest. The trees were too tall, their branches clawing at a sky the color of bruised plums. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized me. But this wasn't just my memory. The trees began to warp, their bark peeling away like rotting flesh, revealing gnarled, skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy with the cloying scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. They weren't looking at me, but through me, their vacant stares fixed on some unseen horror just beyond my vision. The music box's melody crescendoed, each note a hammer blow against my skull, and the forest dissolved. One moment I was lost in that spectral wood. The next, I was standing in a long, narrow hallway. The air was frigid, thick with the smell of mildew and stale sweat. My shoes crunched on something gritty. Fine gravel, mixed with what felt like pulverized concrete. The walls, once painted a sickly institutional green, were now peeling and scarred, revealing layers of grime and neglect. Bare bulbs, some flickering weakly, others dead, hung from frayed wires, casting a stark, unforgiving light on the scene. On either side, heavy, riveted metal doors lined the corridor, each one marked with a fading, hand-painted number. This place. It felt like a cage, a tomb. I moved, compelled by an invisible force, my gaze drawn to one particular door, number 13. The paint on it was scrawled with crude, desperate carvings. Tally marks, a name half obscured, and a single, deep gouge that looked like it had been made by a fingernail, dragging down the metal in a last futile act of defiance. Forgotten. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Inside the small, grimy window of door 13, a face appeared. Not a full face, just a fleeting impression. Gaunt cheeks, eyes that held an ancient, unutterable despair, and a mouth that opened in a silent scream. It was the face of one of the figures from the spectral forest, but here it was sharper, more defined, more real. Then, just as quickly as it had formed, the image shattered, like brittle glass. The corridor wavered, the metal doors blurring into the familiar, dusty wallpaper of my ancestral home. I gasped, stumbling back, my hand flying to my mouth. The music box was still playing, its melody now a frantic, discordant jumble of notes, like a child's toy winding down. The metallic scent, faint but undeniable, still clung to my nostrils. My breath came in ragged gasps. Had I truly been there? Or was it just a waking dream, a hallucination born of stress and isolation? The sudden quiet was deafening, yet it offered no comfort. The images of the corridor, the numbers, the gouged door, the face, they were etched into my mind with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum of forgotten agonies, and the music box was its key. What was real? What was memory? And what was being fed to me, piece by agonizing piece, by whatever malevolent thing now shared this decrepit home? The image was burned behind my eyes, a scorching brand of terror. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating air. This wasn't some trick of the light, some figment of an overactive imagination. This was real. The house, the music box, the shifting reality. It was all connected, and I was caught in its tangled web. I couldn't stay here. I turned, stumbling over my own feet, and practically ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to escape the suffocating presence that clung to that place. The journey back to the main house was a blur of adrenaline and panic. My chest ached, my throat raw. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the heavy oak door shut behind me, leaning against it, gasping for air. But I knew deep down it was no sanctuary. It was the source. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't rationalize it away. That face, it was an echo, a memory, a victim. And it had been one of the figures I'd seen in the distorted mirror. The music box, the house, the impossible locations. They were all threads in a tapestry of horror, and I was the latest pattern woven into its fabric. I needed answers, and I needed them now. My gaze swept over the dusty sitting room, the familiar, unsettling clutter of generations. My family hadn't just vanished into thin air. There had to be records, journals, letters, anything that explained this malevolent inheritance. My search began in earnest, a frantic, desperate scramble. I tore through drawers, emptied cabinets, pulled down stacks of brittle books. Hours bled into one another. My fingers grew grimy, my throat hoarse from the dust. I found nothing but mundane receipts, faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, and an alarming number of moth-eaten textiles. Frustration gnawed at me, a sharp-toothed beast. I moved to the study, a room I'd mostly avoided, filled with heavy, leather-bound tomes and the scent of aged paper and dry rot. I ran my hands along the spines of books, pulling them out, scanning their contents. Most were obscure histories, forgotten poetry, or theological texts. Nothing. Then my hand brushed against a section of the wall behind a particularly large, ornate bookcase. It felt different. My heart gave a lurch. I pushed harder, feeling for a seam, a latch. My fingers found a barely perceptible groove. A hidden library, or more accurately, a hidden collection. On a small, rickety shelf sat a stack of leather-bound journals, their covers cracked and brittle with age. They were unmarked, save for a single stylized symbol etched into the front of the topmost one. A swirling, almost fractal design that made my eyes ache to look at it. It was the same symbol I'd seen faintly etched into the base of the music box. My breath hitched. This was it. The revelation. I pulled the first journal out, its pages stiff and yellowed. The handwriting inside was spidery, precise at first, then growing increasingly erratic, the lines slanting, the ink smudged. I recognized the name on the first page. Elias Thorne, my great-great-grandfather. The early entries were mundane enough, detailing the weather, local events, the construction of a new wing of the house. But then, a shift. They speak of a hunger. I flipped forward, my fingers trembling. The writing deteriorated further, becoming almost frantic. It feeds on memory, on sorrow, on the very fabric of time. The music box, a key, a vessel. It draws the essence. It grants passage. The melody is a lure, a siren's call to the unwary. My dreams are not my own. My thoughts are not my own. A key, a vessel. My mind reeled. The melancholic tune, the one I'd played, had been an invitation. I had opened the door. The house shifts. The walls breathe. The corridor. It is not merely a corridor. It is a pathway, a crucible. The faces, I see them now. They are the echoes of what was taken. The essence consumed. Their despair, a banquet. The faces, the figures in the mirror. It was all clicking into place, a horrifying mosaic. My great-great-grandfather had seen them too. He had known. He had descended into this madness, trapped by the same entity. My eyes darted to the next entry, the handwriting almost illegible, scrawled with desperate, overlapping lines. It wants more. It demands more. It has taken my memories, my joy, my sanity. I am an empty shell. It seeks to break the barrier, to fully manifest. The world outside, it hungers for it. And I. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent like old, dried blood and ozone. A low, guttural thrum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the house itself, a hungry growl. The danger was undeniably real. Elias Thorne wasn't just a previous occupant. He was a victim, a warning. And I, Dean, had just reopened his prison, unleashed his tormentor. I was trapped, not just in this decaying house, but in a nightmare woven from fear, memory, and the insatiable hunger of something ancient and malevolent. The thrumming intensified, a deep, resonant pulse that shook the very foundations of the house. It was aware, and it was coming. The thrumming intensified, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated not just through the floorboards, but through my very bones. The candle in the hidden alcove guttered, then extinguished, plunging me into a darkness that felt thicker, more suffocating than any night I'd known. The air, heavy with that metallic ozonic stench, pressed in on me, making it hard to draw a full breath. My lungs burned, not from exertion, but from the sheer density of the atmosphere. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the encroaching gloom. It danced over the rough stone walls, the forgotten relics, and then, inevitably, settled on the music box. It sat there, on the dusty pedestal, its intricate carvings seeming to writhe in the dancing light. The silver mechanism glinting with an unnerving, almost predatory shine. The melody, which had been a whisper, now swelled, a mournful, drawn-out dirge that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't just heard, it was felt, resonating in my teeth, my skull, my very soul. Then the air shimmered. Not like heat haze, but like a distortion in reality itself. In the space directly above the music box, a form began to coalesce. It was indistinct at first, a wavering outline, like smoke trying to hold a shape. My breath hitched in my throat. My mind, desperate for a logical explanation, offered none. This was forming. The shape solidified, taking on features I knew, features that ripped through my carefully constructed walls of grief and regret. It was her. The woman I loved. The one I'd lost. Her face etched with the same gentle smile I remembered. Her eyes the same deep pools of warmth. Her features were stretched, elongated, as if viewed through a funhouse mirror, yet horrifyingly real. And her smile? It wasn't gentle. This wasn't her. This was a mockery, a grotesque puppet dancing on the strings of my deepest pain. The entity, this parasitic thing, was twisting my memories, using the very image of my lost love as a weapon. Her head tilted, a movement too fluid, too unnatural. A sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, scraped from her throat. Remembered. The accusation in that distorted voice, even in its broken form, struck me harder than any physical blow. It was a direct assault on my guilt, on the memories I cherished and the ones I buried. My determination, however, sharpened into a desperate resolve. This thing was feeding on me, on my past, on my fear. And the music box was its anchor. I lunged, my hand seizing a heavy, ornate brass poker from a nearby display of antique fireplace tools. Its weight felt solid, reassuring in my grip. With a guttural cry, I brought the poker down, aiming for the music box for its delicate silver mechanism. The poker struck with a dull, resonant thud. Not the satisfying crunch of splintering wood or shattering metal I expected. The music box didn't even budge. No scratch, no dent. It simply absorbed the blow, the brass poker bouncing off its surface as if it were striking solid granite. A faint, silvery hum resonated from the box, growing louder, mocking my futile attempt. The melodic dirge intensified, swirling around me, through me. The music box wasn't just an object. It was part of the entity, an extension of its will, impervious to my pathetic attempts at destruction. And I was trapped. Not just in this house, but within its very fabric, my fears, my memories, serving as its sustenance. Desperate, I turned, scrambling away from the pedestal, the distorted face, the impervious box. The walls were rough-hewn stone, but unlike the rest of the house, they were marked with strange, faded symbols and, more disturbingly, numbers. Each stone cell-like alcove was numbered, stark black digits against the gray rock. This was impossible. This house had no such place. This wasn't just a physical space. It was a manifestation, a nightmare made real. I was in a prison, constructed from the forgotten horrors of this place, or perhaps from the entity's own twisted history. I wasn't just trapped in the house. I was trapped within its nightmare, a prisoner in its ever-expanding reality-bending grasp. And the entity, a connoisseur of fear and memory, had only just begun its feast. The crushing weight of my entrapment had settled deep within my bones, a cold, dull ache that seeped into every thought. The music box, that beautiful, malevolent thing, hummed its mocking tune in the periphery of my awareness, a constant reminder of my helplessness. But even the deepest despair holds a limit. A raw, visceral defiance began to simmer in my gut, a rejection of surrender. I was not just a meal. Escape, I knew, was a foolish dream. This house, this nightmare, was now my world. If I couldn't run, I would turn and face it. I would confront it. The moment that thought solidified, the house seemed to sigh around me. The familiar, shifting hallway I'd been wandering, a ghost in my own home, began to ripple. The ornate wallpaper blurred, colors bleeding into one another like cheap watercolors left in the rain. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned, not with the usual settling of old wood, but with a deeper, more unsettling protest. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, resonating in my teeth. Before I could even brace myself, the walls stretched, distorting like a funhouse mirror, then snapped back into a stark, brutal reality. The transformation was absolute, terrifying in its seamlessness. The air was frigid, tasting of damp stone and something vaguely ammoniac. Overhead, a single flickering bulb, encased in a wire cage, cast long, sickly yellow shadows that writhed and pulsed with a life of their own. Peeling, institutional green paint flaked from the rough concrete walls, revealing patches of raw, gray stone beneath. On either side, heavy, rusted cell doors stood half ajar, gaping black mouths leading into unseen horrors. Each door bore a faded, hand-painted number, some smeared, others almost entirely obliterated by decay. I could hear the slow, rhythmic drip, drip. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound, like fingernails on stone, seemed to emanate from the depths of one of the open cells, then vanished. But my determination, newly forged, held firm. This was another test, another illusion, and I refused to break. I moved forward, my breath pluming in the icy air. My eyes scanned every inch of the decaying corridor, searching for anything out of place, anything that didn't fit the grim aesthetic of a forgotten prison. I felt its amusement, its expectation of my fear, but I met it with a stony resolve. As I neared a cell marked with a barely legible 13, I noticed something peculiar. The concrete wall opposite the cell door wasn't uniformly covered in the flaking green paint. A section, about eye level, was utterly bare, as if the paint had been scraped away deliberately, not by time. I ran my fingers over the rough surface. My gaze sharpened, tracing the faint, almost invisible etchings on the exposed stone. They weren't prison graffiti. They were symbols, ancient and angular, arranged in a spiral pattern. They seemed inverted, backward. I leaned closer, my breath held. A small, almost hidden fragment of stone, about the size of my palm, was loose. With a grunt of effort, I pried it free. Behind it, in a shallow cavity, was not a hidden message, but a continuation of the etchings, clearer now, protected from the ravages of the corridor's decay. And beneath the final, intricate symbol, A short, cryptic verse was carved. To still the hum that binds the breath, unmake the echo, cheat the death. No severing, no broken strand, but harmony to shift the sand. My mind raced, connecting the fragmented pieces. Still the hum, the music box. It was part of the house, part of me now. But harmony to shift the sand? A counter melody? A specific sequence, perhaps, of these inverted notes? Or a ritual of focused intent, designed not to destroy, but to disrupt its feeding, to alter its very rhythm. This wasn't about escape. It was about re-establishing control, about containing the parasitic horror, severing its hold on my reality and my life. I could almost feel its awareness of my discovery, its rage. I committed the symbols and the verse to memory. My mind a steel trap. The loose stone fragment felt insignificant in my hand, but the knowledge it had hidden was a weapon. The glimmer of hope wasn't a comforting warmth, but a sharp, cutting edge. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The hum was a vibration in my bones now, a low thrumming that resonated deeper than my eardrums. No severing, no broken strand. The phrase echoed, a cold, unwelcome truth. It wasn't a thing I could simply smash or burn. It was entwined with the house, with my history, with me. But how? I whispered into the oppressive quiet, the unspoken word from the fragmented message finally forming on my lips. Determination, a fragile flame flickered within the growing dread. I had to find something, a book, a journal, anything that might shed light on this parasitic entity, on the family secrets that had birthed it. My mind, still reeling, latched onto the idea of the old study, a room I'd barely touched, filled with dusty tomes and forgotten papers. Perhaps there was a clue, a weakness, a way to sever the connection without destroying myself. I pushed myself up from the floor, my muscles protesting, and started towards the grand staircase. The air felt heavy, viscous, like wading through thick water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I turned towards the corridor that usually led to the study. Except it wasn't there. Where the familiar archway should have been, a solid, unblemished stretch of wallpapered wall now stood. No seam, no outline of a door. Just an unbroken expanse of faded floral patterns. My breath hitched. I reached out a trembling hand, pressing my palm against the cool, unyielding surface. It was solid, real, but impossible. This wasn't just my mind playing tricks. The house itself was shifting. I spun around, disoriented. The entrance to the dining room, previously a wide, inviting opening, was now constricted, the frame warped inward, as if squeezed by an invisible hand. It can't be. I tried another direction, a desperate attempt to find any familiar landmark. I headed for what I remembered as the conservatory, hoping the morning light might offer some clarity, some anchor to reality. But as I rounded a corner, the hallway stretched endlessly before me, the wallpaper peeling back in long, curling strips to reveal raw, unpainted plaster beneath. Then, the floor began to slope. Gently at first, then more acutely, until I felt myself listing to one side, my footing precarious. The walls seemed to converge, the ceiling pressing down, creating a claustrophobic tunnel. I pushed forward, stumbling, my hands scraping against the rough plaster walls. The hallway twisted, defied logic, leading me deeper into an unfamiliar labyrinth. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something acrid and despairing. I stood in a long, narrow passage, the concrete floor gritty under my boots. Each door had a small, barred viewport, too high to peer through easily. The hum here was different too, sharper, more insistent, a high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate directly inside my skull. A place of finality, of despair, of forgotten lives. What was this? An illusion? I took a tentative step, the sound of my boot echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The air here was heavy with the ghosts of screams and unspoken pleas. The hum intensified, throbbing in my temples, and I could almost feel the weight of countless lost memories, countless forgotten fears pressing down on me. Then I saw it. It wasn't anything I recognized, but it resonated with a sickening familiarity. And beneath it, etched deeply into the concrete, a single word: host. My mind reeled. Host. Not just the house, but me. The entity wasn't just feeding on the house's history, it was feeding on my fear, my memories, my time. The house wasn't just shifting, it was becoming a reflection of its parasitic tenant, drawing on places of extreme emotional residue, weaving them into a living nightmare. And I was trapped within it, a willing or unwilling participant in its horrifying expansion. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in that desolate, echoing corridor. I wasn't just fighting a monster in my house. I was fighting for my very self against a thing that saw me as nothing more than a vessel. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern I barely recognized, began to ripple. Not just peeling, but actively undulating, like a skin shedding its layers. It stretched, the patterns distorting into grotesque faces, then dissolving entirely into a smear of gray and rust. The hallway didn't just end, it transformed. I stumbled, my hand instinctively reaching out, finding not the rough plaster I expected, but cold, grimy brick. The faint, distant sounds of the house, the creak of settling beams, the whisper of wind through broken panes, died. I squinted, my stomach clenching. The transformation was complete, absolute. The walls, once brick, were now a patchwork of flaking paint, institutional green over a deeper, dried blood red. My breath hitched in my throat. Each cell I passed was identical in its desolate emptiness, yet each seemed to hold a specific, palpable weight of forgotten lives. My fingers brushed against something raised, a series of faded, crudely etched marks. Tally marks. So many of them, stretching in rows, a silent countdown. A faint, high-pitched whine began to emanate from the corridor's far end, almost imperceptible, like a dying note from a distant, broken instrument. It tugged at something deep inside me, a thread of memory I couldn't quite grasp. The entity, I realized, wasn't just taking. It was luring. It was drawing me deeper, into a space specifically designed to amplify the very thing it craved. This corridor, this monument to finality, was a stage. As I approached the source of the sound, one cell, the last one on the left before the corridor dead-ended into a solid, impenetrable wall, seemed to glow with a faint internal light. It wasn't a physical light, but a luminescence of memory, a shimmering distortion in the air. I hesitated, my heart thrumming against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was it, wasn't it? The core of its hunger. I stepped into the threshold of the cell. The whine intensified, morphing into a familiar, melancholic tune, the music box. But it was distorted, slowed, stretched thin, like a scream played in reverse. And then I saw it, not with my eyes, but with a horrifying clarity that bypassed all senses. A scene materialized, flickering like an old film reel. Not a memory I had consciously recalled in years, but one that had always hummed beneath the surface of my consciousness. A quiet ache. It was my parents, younger, vibrant, laughing. They were in the sun-drenched living room of this very house. Not the warped version, but the one I remembered from childhood, before everything changed. My mother was playing the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, my father watching her with adoration. I, a small boy, was curled on the rug between them, listening, feeling utterly safe, utterly loved. The image was perfect, pristine, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. It was my anchor, my proof of a happier time, a past I could always return to, even if only in my head. But then, the entity began to feed. The edges of the memory frayed. My mother's smile wavered, my father's eyes clouded. The vibrant colors began to desaturate, the laughter to thin. I felt a visceral tug, as if a part of my very soul was being siphoned away. Not just the memory, but the feeling of it, the comfort, the love. This wasn't just a memory. It was the foundation of my emotional security, the wellspring of my resilience. Without it, what would be left? This wasn't just a treasured memory. It was a wound I had never allowed to heal, a grief I had never fully processed. I had idealized that moment, clung to it so fiercely that it had become a prison for my own pain, a constant source of unaddressed sorrow and the fear of utter emptiness. It was feeding on my inability to let go of the pain it masked. The sacrifice. The words resonated in my mind, a stark and terrible truth. Not the love, not my parents, but the pain I had unknowingly nurtured within that memory. The false comfort of an idealized past that kept me from truly healing. The music box's distorted tune wailed, and the memory flickered more violently, threatening to vanish into nothingness. A profound ache bloomed in my chest, a sorrow so deep it threatened to buckle my knees. But then, a strange calm settled over me, a stealing resolve born of desperation and the stark reality of my predicament. This was the key. This was the only way. If I faced the pain, if I accepted the loss and released the fear that had bound me to this idealized past, then the entity would have nothing left to consume. It would starve. I would be vulnerable, raw, exposed, but I would also be free. My grip tightened into fists. This was going to hurt more than anything I had ever experienced. But I would not let this thing consume me. I would not let it win. I would confront the emptiness, and I would walk through it. I made my peace with the coming agony. I was ready. The hallway didn't just end. It dissolved into something else entirely. One moment, the floral patterns writhed like dying things. The next, I was standing on cold, uneven flagstones. The air thick with a smell I couldn't quite place. Metallic, damp, and something else. Something ancient and cloying, like fear given a physical scent. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the soles of my boots. This place wasn't just old. It felt wrong. Faint, flickering light sources, unseen and unfixed, cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with a life of their own. On either side, heavy, rusted iron bars stretched from floor to ceiling, forming narrow cells, each one a black maw. There were no doors, just gaping, empty frames. It was an impossible space, a manifestation of the entity's deepest, most suffocating hunger. This was it, the heart of it all. The entity's truest form, perhaps, or at least its chosen stage for my demise. But I hadn't come to die. I'd come to sever the connection, to rip it out root and branch. The antique music box, clutched tight in my hand, felt heavier than lead, its intricate carvings now seeming to pulse with a faint, malevolent warmth. Give in, let go, join us. I wouldn't. I wouldn't let it twist another memory, another moment of my life, into its grotesque feast. My family had suffered enough. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I lifted the music box. It was still closed. The melody, the one that had started all of this, was locked inside. But I knew its power wasn't just in the sound. It was the conduit, the anchor, and I had to shatter it. My counter-ritual wasn't elegant. It was brute force, fueled by a desperate resolve. I wasn't going to play a new tune or sing it a lullaby. I was going to break it. But first, I needed to expose it. I needed to open it one last time, to bring its insidious song into the open, to draw out the entity's full attention. With a click that echoed unnaturally loud, I snapped open the lid. It was worse here, magnified, each note a needle piercing the fragile fabric of my resolve. The corridor responded. The flagstones beneath my feet vibrated violently, sending shivers up my spine. Dust, thick and ancient, rained down from the ceiling, mingling with larger chunks of plaster that peeled away from the walls. The rusted bars of the cells began to groan, a metallic shriek that grated against the music box's gentle tune, creating a discordant symphony of agony. A wave of vivid, terrifying memories slammed into me, not my own, but stolen ones, amplified and weaponized. The old caretaker, his face contorted in a silent scream, pressing against an unseen wall. The entity was fighting back, throwing its collected arsenal of fear directly at me. "No!" I roared, my voice raw, barely audible over the growing cacophony of the house's rebellion. "These aren't mine." I gripped the music box tighter, feeling its surface grow unnervingly hot against my palm. The melody was reaching a crescendo, an unbearable pitch that seemed to tear at the very air. This was the moment. The entity was pouring all of its power into the music box, trying to overwhelm me, to make me drop it, to make me break. But I wasn't going to. I raised the box, held it aloft. The idea was simple, almost primitive, but it was all I had. A massive crack split the wall beside me, spraying me with grit and plaster. The entire corridor swayed, the ground lurching as if it were a ship caught in a storm. I stumbled, nearly losing my footing, nearly dropping the box. I could feel its tendrils probing my mind, searching for a weak point, a moment of doubt. But I pushed back. I focused on a different memory, a small, defiant one. The day I first left this house, vowing never to return. The sense of liberation, of choosing my own path. It was a tiny spark, but it was mine. It wasn't fear, it was freedom. With a primal scream that tore my throat, I slammed the music box, not against the floor, but against the rusted iron bar of the nearest cell. The metal shrieked in protest, a sound of pure agony. The intricate wood of the box splintered, a sharp crack echoing through the collapsing corridor. The melody, for a split second, wavered, a discordant, dying gasp. It hadn't expected defiance. It hadn't expected me to strike at its very heart. I hit it again, and again. The music box was not just breaking, it was unraveling. Gears flew, tiny springs pinged off the stone, wood shards sprayed the air. The porcelain ballerina shattered, her painted face grinning grotesquely as she disintegrated. With each blow, the entity's hold weakened, the illusions flickering, the groaning of the corridor lessening. The air, though still thick with dust, felt less suffocating, less heavy. Then, with one final desperate swing, the music box exploded in my hands. A shower of splinters, a cloud of dust, and a single deafening crack that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the house. The melody stopped, abruptly, utterly. And then, a silence descended, deeper and more profound than any I had ever known. The ground beneath me ceased its violent shaking. The dust settled, slowly, softly. The flickering lights steadied, revealing only the desolate, ruined corridor. But the silence was terrifying in its own way, and I was standing in its corpse. The melody was a physical thing now, not just sound. It was a drill bit boring into my skull, 1,000 tiny needles pricking my eardrums. The tiny ballerina figure, a blur of white and gold, spun so fast I thought it might tear itself from its pivot, a miniature cyclone of manic joy. The pitch climbed higher, sharper, an unbearable keen that seemed to vibrate the very air, making the dust motes dance in the fractured light of the room. I felt my teeth ache, my vision blur at the edges, my stomach clench. This wasn't just music, it was a weapon. Then the world buckled. The peeling wallpaper, the sagging ceiling, the dust-choked air of the house. It all shivered like a bad photograph, then dissolved. One moment I was in the dusty drawing room. The next I was standing on cold, damp concrete. The searing heat of the music box was still in my hand, but the air around me was a frigid, penetrating dampness that sank straight into my bones. I blinked, trying to clear the ringing in my ears, to make sense of the new reality. I was in a corridor, impossibly long and narrow, stretching into a gloom so profound it swallowed the faint light at either end. The walls were rough, stained concrete, slick with condensation, streaked with what looked like ancient rust and something darker, more organic. On either side, heavy steel doors, painted a faded institutional green, were set into the concrete. These weren't ordinary doors. These were cells. I felt it instantly, the crushing weight of confinement, the ghost of despair clinging to the very air. The air itself smelled of stale sweat, forgotten meals, and something metallic, like old blood. This was it, I realized with a sickening lurch. A place of finality, of suffocating hopelessness. The entity had brought me here, to its ultimate feeding ground. The music box in my hand pulsed, a living ember. The ballerina was still, frozen mid-pirouette, its melody gone. It was testing me, waiting for me to break. He hadn't been talking about the absence of sound. He'd been talking about this. No, not this time. It had fed on my past, on my fear, on my time. It had twisted my reality, dragged me through its grotesque funhouse. But it wouldn't have my end. Not here. Not like this. My hand still burned, but I squeezed the music box tighter, ignoring the pain. It was the anchor, the tether, the heart of this nightmare. Destroy the heart. Destroy the illusion. My gaze darted around the corridor, desperate. What could I use? The walls were bare, the doors sealed. My eyes fell on a section of the concrete wall near one of the cell doors. A hairline crack, almost invisible in the gloom, ran down from a corroded pipe. It was a weakness, a chance. With a roar that tore from my throat, raw and ragged, I swung the music box. The heavy brass bass, still radiating heat, smashed into the concrete. A dull thud, a spray of dust, nothing. The wall remained unyielding. It was waiting for me to give up, to despair. "No!" I screamed, my voice echoing back at me, thin and reedy. I swung again, harder, putting every ounce of my remaining strength, every last drop of my defiance into the blow. The impact vibrated up my arm, jarring my teeth. A chip of concrete flew, again, and again. The burning in my hand was excruciating, but it fueled me. Each strike was a declaration, a refusal. The concrete began to spiderweb, fine cracks branching out from the point of impact. The music box itself was taking a beating. The delicate porcelain ballerina already cracked, the brass casing dented and scraped. Then, with a sickening crunch, a larger chunk of concrete gave way. Perfect. I lifted the music box one last time, my arm trembling with exhaustion and pain. This was it, the final stand. I brought it down with all the force I could muster, aiming squarely for the rebar. The sound was deafening. A screech of tortured metal, a splintering of porcelain, a violent, desperate tearing. The music box exploded in my hand, not with fire, but with a sudden, devastating release of contained energy. Shards of brass, porcelain, and tiny twisted gears flew, embedding themselves in the concrete wall around me. The rebar, still dripping condensation, was now adorned with the mangled remnants of the mechanism. But this time, it was different. The damp concrete walls began to shimmer, to waver like heat haze. The steel doors blurred. The corridor was gone. I stood panting, my chest heaving, my hand throbbing with a searing pain where the music box had been. My palm was scorched, angry red welts forming where the hot brass had pressed. It was utterly, irrevocably destroyed. Inert, the house was still, truly still. The air was merely air, no longer thick with unseen hunger. I stumbled, my legs weak, and leaned against a dusty armchair. My body ached, my head pounded, and my mind felt wrung out, scoured clean. But I was alive. I was whole. The memories were mine again, no longer threatened. The house, silent now, seemed to sigh around me. It was just a house. An old, crumbling house. I walked, slowly at first, then with more purpose, through the drawing room, past the grand staircase, down the long hall. Every step was heavy, but each one carried me further from the horror, closer to the door. I reached the massive oak front door. It turned with a familiar groan. I pulled it open, and the fresh, clean scent of the outside world, of pine and damp earth, rushed in, a balm to my raw nerves. I stepped out onto the porch, turning my back on the silent, empty house. I was scarred, yes, physically, and in a way I knew would never fully heal. But I had faced it. I had survived. The melody, 1,000 screaming banshees condensed into a single piercing note, tore through me. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer raw pressure behind my eyes. The music box pulsed, a living heart of brass and porcelain, its heat scorching my palm, the intricate carvings biting into my flesh. I could feel it, the thing inside, thrashing, screaming its own silent protest as I squeezed, as I tried to crush it, to break the source of the torment. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was memory, fear, time itself, all collapsing in on me, a maelstrom of borrowed terrors and forgotten moments. I saw flashes, a child crying in an empty room, a hand reaching out from a shadowed doorway, the slow, agonizing decay of a forgotten photograph. These weren't my memories, not truly, but they were mine now, grafted onto my consciousness by the entity's desperate struggle. But I wouldn't break. Not again. A terrible, guttural sound ripped from my throat, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. It was a roar of defiance, of pure, unadulterated rage against the violation, against the parasitic grip. With every ounce of strength I possessed, I twisted, I crushed, I fought back against the invading sensation. The brass casing groaned, a metallic shriek that briefly overpowered the melody. I felt a sharp crack, then another, the porcelain figurines inside shattering, their delicate forms dissolving into sharp fragments against my relentless grip. The melody faltered. It hitched like a dying breath, a strangled gasp in the throat of a colossal beast. The pressure in my skull released, not gently, but with a sudden, violent snap, like a spring recoiling. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of musty air, my vision clearing, though the edges of my world still swam. In my hands, the music box was no longer a single cohesive object. It was a mangled mess of bent brass, shattered porcelain shards, and splintered wood. A thin, acrid smoke, smelling faintly of burnt sugar and something indescribably ancient, curled from the wreckage, dissipating into the stagnant air. The entity was gone. Or, at least, it was no longer here. I don't remember much of the immediate aftermath. Just the overwhelming exhaustion, the tremor that ran through my body, and the taste of metallic dust on my tongue. I must have stumbled out of the house, leaving the ruins of the music box amidst the other forgotten relics. Months have passed since then. I never went back inside. I couldn't. I sold it, or rather, I signed it over to a demolition crew for a pittance just to be rid of it. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted it gone, reduced to dust and timber. My life, or what's left of it, is different now. The world feels sharper, the colors more vivid, the sounds more distinct. I find myself drawn to forgotten places, to to structures heavy with history and residual emotion. It's not a morbid curiosity, not exactly. It's more like a compulsion, an instinct I can't quite shake. I'd heard about it from a contact, a former urban explorer who shared my strange fascination with decay. He knew I wasn't looking for thrills. He knew I was looking for something else. I walked through the echoing concrete halls, the air thick with the dust of forgotten time and the faint metallic tang of rust. The cells, with their heavy bolted doors, stood open, yawning like empty mouths. This wasn't fear, not the crippling kind that used to paralyze me. This was something else. A profound awareness of the layers of human experience, of the echoes of lives lived and ended within these walls. I paused in what must have been the execution chamber, a stark, utilitarian space with a drain in the center of the floor. And then I heard it. Not a full melody, not the overwhelming torrent from before. It was barely there, a single sustained note, melancholic and haunting, brushing against the edges of my perception. It wasn't coming from the walls or the air or any discernible source. It was coming from within me, an echo chamber in my own mind, or perhaps a resonance with the lingering energies of the place. I stood there for a long moment, listening, letting the phantom note wash over me. It didn't cause pain, not like before. It was just there, a reminder, a mark. I was no longer just Dean. I was Dean, who had faced the thing that fed on fear and memory, and somehow, against all odds, had survived. The experience had changed me, sharpened me, stripped away the trivialities and left behind a core of grim, unyielding resolve. I still felt the world's quiet horrors, perhaps even more acutely than before, but I no longer cowered. I had walked through the fire, and though I carried its scars, I also carried its heat. A lingering melody, a constant hum in the vast, terrifying symphony of existence.